Most people hear the word brainwashing and they get uncomfortable. They think manipulation, control, loss of freedom. But let me tell you something that may shock you. You are already brainwashed. Every belief you have about money, every story you tell yourself about who you are, every limit you think you can't cross, none of that came from you. It came from repetition, from emotion, from experiences that hit you when you were young, vulnerable, or overwhelmed. So here's the real question. If your brain is already being programmed every single day, why wouldn't you take control of the program? Most people think they're living freely. They think their thoughts are their own. Their limits are logical. Their fears are justified. They say, this is just how I am, or that's just the way the world works, without ever stopping to question where those ideas came from. But let me slow this down for a moment, because this is where real transformation begins. You didn't wake up one day and consciously decide what to believe about success, money, confidence, or your own potential. Those beliefs were installed layer by layer, moment by moment. And the truth is, whether you like the word or not, you've been brainwashed long before you ever chose a direction for your life. Think about it. From the time you were young, you were surrounded by voices louder than your own. Parents doing the best they could with what they knew. Teachers following systems that reward conformity, not greatness. Friends reinforcing what's normal. Society repeating the same messages over and over until they felt like facts. Don't stand out, don't fail, don't aim too high, be realistic. And every time those messages were delivered with emotion, embarrassment, rejection, fear, pain, your nervous system locked them in as truth. Not because they were true, but because they were intense. Here's what most people never realize. The brain doesn't learn through logic. It learns through repetition and emotion. That's it. If something is repeated often enough or felt strongly enough, your brain accepts it as reality. That's how a single humiliating moment can define someone's confidence for decades. That's how one failure becomes a lifelong identity. That's how people end up living inside invisible cages they don't even know exist. So when someone says, I'm not motivated, or I'm just not disciplined, or success isn't for people like me, what they're really saying is, I've been conditioned. And conditioning is not destiny. Conditioning is just programming. And anything that's programmed can be reprogrammed. But here's the part that really matters. Doing nothing is still a choice. If you don't consciously decide what goes into your mind, the world will decide for you. News cycles designed to trigger fear, social media feeding comparison and inadequacy, conversations filled with excuses disguised as realism. If you're not careful, you start borrowing other people's limitations and calling them wisdom. You start mistaking familiarity for truth. And over time, you don't just hear those voices, you become them. Let me ask you something powerful. If a belief was installed through repetition and emotion, how do you think it gets removed? Not by arguing with it once, not by reading a quote and feeling inspired for 10 minutes. Change happens when you interrupt the old pattern with enough intensity that the brain is forced to pay attention. When you create new emotional experiences that are stronger than the old ones. When you repeat empowering beliefs until they become automatic, not forced. Most people wait for evidence before they change their beliefs. But high performers understand something different. Beliefs come first, behavior follows, results come last. If you wait for the world to prove you're capable, you'll wait forever. You have to decide who you are before life reflects it back to you. That decision, made with conviction, begins the process of rewriting your internal story. And this isn't about pretending everything is perfect. It's about refusing to let unconscious programming run your life. It's about catching the moment when your mind says, I can't, and asking, according to who? It's about recognizing that many of your fears aren't warnings, they're echoes. Echoes of past moments that no longer exist, replaying on a loop because they were never challenged. Here's another truth people don't like to hear. Your current results are proof of your current conditioning. Not your potential, not your worth, your conditioning. And that's incredible news because it means your future is not limited by your past. It's limited only by what you continue to rehearse in your mind. Every day you are practicing something. You're practicing confidence or hesitation, empowerment or doubt, ownership or blame. The brain doesn't care which one you choose. It will strengthen whatever you repeat. So the real shift happens when you stop asking, why am I like this? And start asking, what have I been training myself to believe? Because once you see that, you stop taking your thoughts so personally. You stop assuming they're facts. You start treating them as habits, and habits can be changed. This is where conscious brainwashing begins, not from force, but from intention. You choose what you focus on. You choose the questions you ask yourself. You choose the standards you live by. You choose the emotional states you practice daily. And slowly, quietly, powerfully, your identity begins to shift. not because you hoped it would, but because you trained it to. The moment you realize you were programmed is the moment you take your power back. Most people think their life is controlled by their circumstances. They believe their bank account, their past, their education, or the opinions of others are what determine how far they can go. But that's never been the real driver. The real force shaping your results every single day is something far deeper and far more powerful than conditions. It's your identity, the way you see yourself, the story you repeat about who you are, what you're capable of. And whether you realize it or not, you are always acting in alignment with that story. You don't get what you want in life. You get what you believe you are. That belief determines what you tolerate, what you pursue, and what you walk away from. Someone who sees themselves as confident doesn't need motivation to speak up. They just do it. Someone who sees themselves as disciplined doesn't debate whether to follow through. It's simply who they are. Identity removes friction. It turns effort into instinct. But here's where it gets dangerous. Most people never consciously choose their identity. It's inherited, absorbed, pieced together from past experiences, labels, and emotional moments. One teacher says you're not that smart. One failure makes you feel incapable. One rejection convinces you you're unworthy. And slowly, without realizing it, you stop seeing those moments as events and start seeing them as definitions. You don't say, I failed. You say, I'm a failure. And once that identity is in place, your brain will do everything it can to prove it right. Your mind is a meaning-making machine. It's always looking for consistency. So once you decide, consciously or unconsciously, who you are, your brain filters reality to support that decision. You notice evidence that matches the story and ignore anything that contradicts it. That's why two people can experience the same setback and walk away with completely different outcomes. One sees proof they should quit, the other sees feedback. Same event, different identity. This is why willpower doesn't last. You can force yourself to act against your identity for a short period of time, but eventually you snap back to who you believe you are. If you see yourself as someone who struggles with money, you might work harder for a while, but you'll find a way to sabotage success. If you see yourself as someone who always procrastinates, you'll create last-minute chaos even when things are going well. Identity always wins in the long run. So the real question becomes, how do you change it? Not on the surface, not with affirmations you don't believe. Real identity change happens when you attach massive emotional meaning to a new decision, when you stop negotiating with your old story and draw a line in the sand, when you say, this is who I am now, and back it with action, repetition, and intensity. Identity is shaped in moments of decision, especially when those decisions are uncomfortable. Every time you do the thing you said you'd never do, you reinforce the old identity. Every time you do the thing you once avoided, you weaken it. Your brain keeps score. It's always asking, who am I based on what I consistently do? Not occasionally, consistently. This is why standards matter more than goals. Goals are things you pursue. Standards are who you are. A goal says, I want to work out. A standard says, I don't miss workouts. A goal says, I want to be more confident. A standard says, I speak up even when my voice shakes. Standards shape identity because they define what's acceptable and what's not. And once something is no longer acceptable, it stops being an option. Most people wait for confidence before they act, but confidence is a result, not a requirement. It's built through keeping promises to yourself. Each small win sends a signal to your nervous system, I can trust me. And trust is the foundation of a powerful identity. When you trust yourself, you move differently, you speak differently, you decide faster, you stop outsourcing your worth to the opinions of others. And understand this, changing your identity will feel uncomfortable at first. Of course it will. You're stepping outside of the familiar. Your brain will try to pull you back with doubt, fear, and old narratives. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're doing something new. Growth feels unsafe to a nervous system that's been trained for survival, not greatness. So don't wait until it feels natural. Make it familiar through repetition. Act like the person you've decided to become long before you feel like them. Speak from that place. Make decisions from that place. Hold yourself to the standards of that place. Over time, your behavior rewires your belief, and your belief reshapes your identity. When you change who you believe you are, everything else has no choice but to follow. Most people think change starts in the mind. They believe if they just understand something well enough, if they read the right book or hear the right idea, their life will automatically shift. But knowledge alone has never transformed anyone. You've known what to do for years. You've known how to eat better, manage your time, speak up, take action, and yet knowing didn't move you. Why? Because the mind doesn't run the show. Emotion does. Emotion is what drives behavior. It's what tells your body to move, to hesitate, to act, or to shut down. You can have the smartest plan in the world, but if your emotional state doesn't support it, you'll sabotage it every single time. That's why people make promises in moments of clarity and break them in moments of emotion. It's not a lack of intelligence, it's a lack of emotional leverage. Your brain is wired to associate emotions with survival. When something feels painful, embarrassing, or overwhelming, your nervous system doesn't analyze it, it reacts. It stores that feeling as a signal. The next time you're in a similar situation, the emotion comes back first, before logic ever gets a chance. That's why fear can stop you before you even know what you're afraid of. That's why confidence can carry you through situations you're not fully prepared for. Emotion sets the direction before thought ever catches up. This is also why your strongest beliefs were formed in emotional moments, not calm ones, not logical ones, emotional ones, moments of humiliation, rejection, excitement, triumph, or pain. Those moments burned associations into your nervous system, and now, years later, you're still reacting to those associations without realizing it. You think you're making a rational choice, but you're really just avoiding a feeling. Here's the breakthrough. If emotion is what wires the brain, then emotion is also what rewires it. You don't change by talking yourself into something once. You change by creating emotional experiences that are stronger than the ones that shaped you. You change when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of change. When the pleasure of growth outweighs the comfort of familiarity, most people try to change their habits while staying in the same emotional state. They wake up stressed, rushed, distracted, and then wonder why they can't focus, commit, or follow through. But state drives strategy. The way you feel in your body determines how you show up in the world. When you change your emotional state, you change your access to resources, confidence, creativity, energy, certainty. This is why successful people don't wait to feel motivated. They know how to generate it. They know how to shift their physiology, their focus, and their meaning. They move their body with intention. They change their breathing. They ask better questions. They don't let their emotional state be dictated by the environment. They condition it. And conditioning happens through repetition with intensity. One emotional experience can change a belief instantly if it's strong enough, but most change happens through consistent emotional reinforcement. Every time you step forward despite fear, you send a message to your nervous system, this is safe. Every time you associate pain with procrastination and pleasure with action, you rewire the loop. Over time, what once felt terrifying becomes normal. What once felt difficult becomes automatic. But here's where most people sabotage themselves. They avoid discomfort at all costs. They interpret discomfort as danger. But discomfort is not danger, it's growth. It's the signal that you're stretching beyond the limits of your conditioning. If you only do what feels comfortable, you only reinforce who you've been. If you want a new identity, you must be willing to feel new emotions. This doesn't mean forcing yourself through misery. It means learning to reframe what discomfort means. Instead of labeling it as fear, you label it as excitement. Instead of seeing resistance as a stop sign, you see it as a doorway. The meaning you give an emotion determines how it affects you. Two people can feel the same physical sensation. One calls it anxiety, the other calls it anticipation. Same body, different outcome. And the more you practice emotional mastery, the more power you reclaim. You stop being at the mercy of moods. You stop letting temporary feelings dictate permanent decisions. You become the kind of person who can feel fear and still act, doubt and still decide, pressure and still perform. Understand this, your emotions are not happening to you. They are happening through you. And once you learn how to direct them, they become fuel instead of friction. They stop controlling your life and start propelling it. When you master your emotional state, you take control of the force that shapes every decision you make. Most people think change happens in a moment. They're waiting for the breakthrough, the lightning strike, the one experience that flips the switch forever. And sometimes that happens. But what actually determines who you become is what you repeat, what you practice, what you reinforce when no one is watching. Because the brain is not designed to respond to occasional effort. It responds to patterns, and the patterns you repeat, especially with emotion, are the ones that shape your identity and your destiny. Every belief you have right now is the result of repetition. You didn't decide once that you weren't good enough. You practiced it, you replayed it, you felt it again and again until it became familiar, and familiarity feels like truth. That's how a hot turns into a belief. That's how a belief turns into a habit, and that's how a habit turns into a life. Here's the part most people miss. Repetition alone is not enough. You can repeat something 1,000 times with no emotional energy and it won't stick. You've seen this. People say affirmations every morning while feeling bored, skeptical, or distracted, and nothing changes. Why? Because the brain only rewires when something matters, when it feels intense, when there's emotion behind it. That's the missing ingredient. Repetition with intensity is what creates permanent change. That's how trauma works. One emotionally charged moment can shape someone for years. But the same mechanism works in your favor when you use it consciously. When you attach strong emotion to a new belief, a new decision, a new standard, your nervous system locks it in. It stops being something you think about and starts being something you are. Think about how you learned to associate certain things with pain or pleasure. It didn't happen intellectually. It happened emotionally. Touching something hot once was enough. Failing publicly once was enough. The intensity burned the lesson in. But now imagine deliberately creating positive emotional intensity around growth, discipline, courage, and follow-through. Imagine rehearsing certainty instead of doubt, power instead of hesitation. This is why rituals matter. What you do daily is not neutral. It's either reinforcing the old pattern or installing a new one. The way you start your morning, the language you use with yourself, the standards you hold when things get hard, all of it is repetition. And repetition is training. You're always training something. The only question is what? Most people underestimate the power of small, consistent actions because they don't feel dramatic. They don't feel life-changing in the moment. But the brain doesn't need drama. It needs consistency. Every time you follow through, even in a small way, you strengthen the neural pathway associated with success. Every time you quit, you strengthen the pathway associated with escape. Over time, one becomes automatic and the other fades. Intensity doesn't mean forcing yourself into extremes. It means presence. It means emotional engagement. It means being fully in the moment when you take action, when you make a promise to yourself and keep it, feel it. When you break a pattern that used to control you, anchor it, celebrate it. When you catch yourself slipping and redirect it with awareness, not guilt. Guilt weakens change, meaning strengthens it. Here's another truth. Your brain loves efficiency. Once it learns a pattern, it wants to repeat it with less effort. That's why habits feel hard at first and easy later. That's why the first reps are uncomfortable and the later ones feel natural. The discomfort is not a signal to stop. It's a signal that you're installing something new. If you quit during that phase, you don't just stop progress. You reinforce the old pattern even more strongly. This is why consistency beats intensity alone. A burst of motivation without follow-through doesn't change your wiring. It just gives you a temporary high. But repeated action, even when motivation is low, builds trust with yourself. And trust is what allows intensity to grow naturally. Over time, you don't need to hype yourself up. You've trained your nervous system to move automatically. And understand this, repetition doesn't care whether what you're repeating is empowering or destructive. The brain doesn't judge, it records. If you repeatedly focus on what you lack, you train scarcity. If you repeatedly rehearse worst-case scenarios, you train anxiety. If you repeatedly tell yourself you'll start tomorrow, you train delay. The cost of unconscious repetition is a life lived on autopilot. So conscious repetition becomes your greatest tool. You decide what thoughts get rehearsed. You decide what behaviors get reinforced. You decide what emotional states become familiar. And you don't wait until you feel like it. You do it because you understand the mechanics. You understand that every repetition is a vote for the person you're becoming. Permanent change is not created by chance. It's created by design. And when you combine repetition with emotional intensity, you don't just change what you do, you change who you are. What you rehearse with feeling today becomes who you live as tomorrow. Most people believe success is a matter of willpower. They think if they could just try harder, stay motivated longer, push themselves more, everything would change. But willpower is a fragile resource. It fades when you're tired, stressed, hungry, or overwhelmed. And if your entire future depends on something that disappears the moment life gets difficult, you're building on a shaky foundation. That's why so many people start strong and fall off. Not because they're weak, but because they're fighting against something far more powerful than their intentions. Your environment is shaping you every single day. The people you spend time with, the conversations you listen to, the media you consume, the physical spaces you live and work in, all of it is programming your nervous system quietly and consistently. And here's the truth most people overlook. Your environment will win when your willpower runs out. Every time, think about it. Put the most disciplined person in an environment filled with temptation, distraction, and negativity long enough, and even they will begin to slip. Now put an average person in an environment that supports focus, growth, and accountability, and they begin to rise. Not because they suddenly changed who they are, but because the environment changed what was reinforced. You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And your environment is the most powerful system you have. It determines what feels normal, what feels easy, and what feels expect. If chaos is normal around you, chaos will feel comfortable. If excellence is normal, excellence becomes effortless. This is why people struggle to change when they go back to the same surroundings. Same couch, same phone habits, same conversations, same excuses dressed up as logic. The environment whispers to the nervous system, this is who you are. Unless you interrupt that message, it will keep playing on repeat. But here's the empowering part. You don't need to change everything at once. You just need to change what you're repeatedly exposed to. Success is often the result of subtraction before addition, removing the distractions, reducing exposure to negativity, limiting access to habits that sabotage you. When something is no longer constantly in your face, its power over you weakens. Look at the people around you, not with judgment, but with honesty. Are they reinforcing growth or excuses, energy or exhaustion, ownership or blame? You don't need to cut everyone off, but you do need to be intentional. Proximity is power. Whoever you spend the most time with will shape your standards, whether you like it or not. And it's not just people, it's information. What you feed your mind before bed, what you scroll through when you wake up, what you listen to in the car. These are not harmless habits, they're emotional conditioning. Fear-based news trains anxiety. Comparison-based content trains inadequacy. Repeated exposure shapes emotional baselines, and emotional baselines shape behavior. Your physical environment matters too. A cluttered space creates mental noise. A space designed for focus signals your brain to perform. Small adjustments, lighting, layout, access can dramatically change how you feel and how you act. You don't need perfection, you need alignment. Your surroundings should support the identity you're building, not the one you're trying to outgrow. Here's something most people resist. Designing your environment is an act of self-respect. It's saying, I take my future seriously enough to protect it. High performers don't rely on discipline alone. They remove friction from good habits and add friction to bad ones. They make success easier and failure harder. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. When you align your environment with your goals, behavior changes without force. You don't need to argue with yourself, you don't need constant motivation. The right action becomes the path of least resistance. And when that happens, consistency becomes natural instead of exhausting. This is also why commitment matters. When you publicly align your environment through accountability, structure, or stakes, you raise the cost of staying the same. The nervous system responds to consequences, not punishment, but meaning. When the environment reinforces a standard, your identity begins to lock in. So stop asking why you can't stay consistent and start asking what around you is training inconsistency. Stop blaming yourself for lack of discipline and start designing surroundings that support your growth. You don't need more willpower. You need a better environment. Change what surrounds you and you change what becomes inevitable. Most people are waiting for clarity, waiting for confidence, waiting for the perfect moment when fear disappears and conditions finally feel right. They tell themselves they'll decide once they know more, once things settle down, once they feel ready. But life doesn't reward waiting, it rewards decision, because decisions are the moments when you take control back from circumstances and hand it to yourself. Your life today is the result of decisions you've made and the decisions you've avoided, not your intelligence, not your luck, not your background. Decisions, small ones, daily ones, the ones you barely notice, but repeat over and over until they shape your direction. Every time you decide to speak up or stay silent, act or delay, commit or negotiate, you're casting a vote for the future you'll live in. Most people give their power away by blaming conditions. They say, if the economy were better, I'd be more successful. If I had more support, I'd take action. If I felt more confident, I'd go all in. But conditions are never neutral. They're always changing. If your progress depends on conditions, you will always be at their mercy. High performers understand something different. Conditions don't control them, decisions do. A real decision is not a preference. It's not a wish. It's not something you think about and revisit every day. A real decision cuts off alternatives. It changes behavior. It moves you from possibility into action. When you decide, your nervous system reorganizes, your focus sharpens, your energy shifts. You stop asking, should I? And start asking, how will I? Think about the moments in your life that truly changed you. Not the moments you thought about changing, but the moments you decided. The moment you said, I'm done. The moment you said, no more. The moment you said, this is who I am now. Those decisions didn't come from perfect circumstances. They came from emotional leverage. From a point where staying the same hurt more than moving forward, most people avoid decisions because they fear making the wrong one. But indecision is a decision, and it often has the highest cost. It slowly erodes self-trust, it trains hesitation, it reinforces the identity of someone who waits for permission, and over time that becomes more damaging than any single wrong move ever could. Here's what most people don't realize. You don't need certainty to decide, you need commitment. Certainty follows decision, not the other way around. When you commit, you begin to notice opportunities you were blind to before. You meet people you wouldn't have met. You develop skills you wouldn't have developed. The world responds to decisive energy, and once you decide, you must decide again. Oz decisions aren't one-time events. They're daily practices. Every morning, you decide whether to live by your standards or negotiate with them. Every moment of pressure tests the strength of your commitment. That's not failure, that's training. Each time you recommit, you deepen the identity you're building. Understand this, your brain is constantly looking for evidence to support your self-image. When you follow through on decisions, you prove to yourself that you are someone who acts. When you break them, you prove the opposite. That's why consistency is not about perfection. It's about recovery. It's about how quickly you return to your decision after you slip. And stop confusing confidence with readiness. Confidence is built by doing, not thinking. Action creates clarity. Momentum creates belief. You don't wait until you feel like a leader, you act like one. You don't wait until you feel disciplined, you follow through. Each decisive action strengthens the neural pathways associated with certainty and control. This is how you reclaim your power. You stop reacting to life and start directing it. You stop outsourcing your future to circumstances and start owning your choices. You become the kind of person who decides quickly and adjusts intelligently instead of waiting endlessly and regretting silently. At the end of the day, success is not about having better conditions than other people. It's about making better decisions within the conditions you have. And the moment you decide with clarity and conviction, you shift the trajectory of your life. Decide and let everything else rise to meet you.